Leviticus chapter 25. Yahuwah's Jubilee. Let's jump right in. Long chapter we have here. Have my first reader read Leviticus 25, verses 1 through 5, please.
And Yahuwah spake unto Moshe in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land which I gave you, then shall the land keep his Sabbath unto Yahuwah. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for Yahuwah. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. That which groweth of its own according of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. That which falls away of its own accord, which Yeshua is harvesting, thou shalt not reap, neither oppose Yeshua by gathering the grapes of his Nazarites, consecrated one, for it is a year of rest unto the land.
Oh, no.
Oh, I shouldn't read that.
That's good. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So, we see here that Yah tells Moshe, speaking to the children, that when they come into the land that he's to give them, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto Yahuwah. So, we just recently went over where Yah said for man to keep a Sabbath unto Yahuwah. Now he's saying for his land to keep a Sabbath unto Yahuwah. Amen? Amen. You know, and he goes on to say, 6 years thou shalt sow the field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard and gather in. And then we have a Aleph Tav, gather in Yahushua's fruit thereof. You know, and that's important to remember. You know, because when we belong to him and he's our master, then what we have actually belongs to him, not us.
Hallelujah.
See, and a lot of people get it twisted and thinking that, you know, what they have is theirs, you know, and they still yet claim to be in Messiah. Well, if you're in Messiah, if you're truly his, then what you have is his. You know, it's like the old saying used to go, what's mine is his, and what's his is his. It'll hit you later, don't worry about it. But that's the whole thing with this. You know, when you don't belong to yourself, then you don't own anything yourself. You know, and because we belong to him, everything that we have is also his. In verse 4, he says, But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for Yahuwah. Thou shalt neither sow thy field, nor prune thy vineyard. In other words, he doesn't want his land to be worked, period. Don't do nothing. You know, very similar to the Sabbath that he instituted for Israel. In verse 5, I found it interesting that there was actually an Aleph Tav right there at the beginning of the sentence that, you know, you would never see in the King James or many translations. And so it's speaking of Yahushua in this sense. But what I found even more interesting was that these 7 words, that which groweth of its own accord, is all translated from one Hebrew word, safiyak, number 5599, meaning something spontaneously falling off. Now we see here that the King James translators translated as that which groweth of its own accord, but it literally means something spontaneously falling off. falling off. So, in other words, you know, yeah, it does speak to something that's growing to its own accord and falling off of his own accord. And what he's saying is, well, we have to see what of thy harvest actually means. Of thy harvest is taken from the Hebrew word kratzir, number 7105, and it means harvest, but it means in the process of harvesting. You know, so, you know, with Yahushua, the pointer to that, the aleph tau that points to Yahushua being at the front, you know, it begins to, you know, take form, you know, when you put these things in conjunction to one another. It goes on to say, thou shalt not reap neither, and then we have another aleph tau with, actually with the vav in front of it. You know, the vav speaks of man and his works, you know, so it being in front of the aleph tau kind of speaks of, you know, man and his works opposing the will of Yah, you know, or in the face of the will of Yah, if you would. You know, and then it speaks of gathering the grapes, you know. Actually, it's speaking of gathering Yahshua's grapes, because we know that they're his. And then I found it particularly interesting that these 4 words, of thy vine undressed, is taken from the Hebrew word nazir. Now, you may recognize the Hebrew word nazir, number 5139, for it is, we first ran across it in Numbers chapter 6, when we did that study, and it speaks of a Nazarite. You know, it's the very word for Nazarite, which means consecrated one or devoted one. You know, so when you really look at this, you see that Yah is talking about a little bit more than just some fruit growing on a vine. Amen? You know, so what I did was I took the definitions and inserted them into the text. And Leviticus 25:5 reads, Yahushua's, that which falls away of its own accord, which Yahushua is harvesting. So in other words, it's what it's doing is painting a picture for you. You know, it's painting a picture of stuff that's growing and it's falling away, spontaneously falling off the tree or the vine or what have you on its own accord. You know, and what it's depicting is, you know, that this is Yahushua's harvesting. You know, in other words, you know, he's the one causing it to grow. He's the one causing it to fall off the vine or the tree. In other words, he's the one harvesting it.
Right, yeah.
It's his harvest. You know, and he's saying, thou shalt not reap. Don't touch his harvest. Neither oppose Yahushua, or neither oppose Yahushua by gathering the grapes of his Nazarites. Neither by gathering the grapes of his consecrated ones, his devoted ones. For it is a year of rest unto the land. You know, and when you start thinking about what we know in the Brit Kadashah, the New Testament, and start applying this to this, we know that the Brit Kadashah, or the New Testament, in which we get our new covenant, we know that we're to be attached to the vine. We're to be those Nazarites. We're to be the ones that's attached to the vine. We're to be the consecrated ones, the devoted ones to Yah. You know, and what he's saying is, during this time, they're not to harvest us. Why? Because ultimately, this speaks of the millennium reign of Messiah. Ultimately, when not only man would have a rest, but the land would have a rest as well. It speaks of the great Jubilee. You know, it speaks of that time when his Nazarites, the ones who have been devoted to him, the ones that have been consecrated to him, you know, when their fruit will not be reaped, it won't be harvested. And, you know, the fruit of his consecrated ones speaks to the love, the joy, the peace, the long-suffering, the meekness, you know, that sort of thing, the faith and the hope. That's the type of fruit that right now, we spoke about that last week with the olive tree, right? And we talked about the pressing and the pressing. You know, did I say the pressing and the pressing? Oh, well, I didn't mean that. We talked about the pressing and the squishing, rather, you know, to get the oil from the olive. you know, which was a type of fruit, right? You know, see, this is what they do with the righteous. You know, our fruits, the fruit of the Spirit, you know, they get trampled on. They get trampled under feet so that wine can be made, so that oil can be made for the lamps, for the menorah, so that wine can be made, that men as well as Elohim might be married. See, but during this time, during the time of the Jubilee, during the time of Yah's great Sabbath, you know, they won't be the ones getting harvested. This is their time to shine. You know, so their love, joy, peace, long suffering, meekness, hope, faith, you know, this stuff won't be getting trampled on. You know, it won't be getting used and misused. Well, it won't be getting misused, we should say. Now, it's important. No, I don't want to go there right now. All right. Leviticus 25, verses 6 and 7 says, "And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee, and for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in the land, shall all the increase thereof be meat." Okay, now, when I look within the text, within the actual text, the Hebrew text, I don't actually see this. It says the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee, and for the servant. Now, I do see for the servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee. But I do not see for you or for thee. You know, and, you know, a lot of people interpret that as, you know, that during this time that the quote-unquote, let's see, what shall we call them? The leasees of the land, because we can't call it their land or the landlord, because Yah is ultimately the landlord. He let us know that, right? Mm-hmm. He let us know that the land is his. Amen? Right. So we can't, well, he's the true master, you know, but the one who he's entrusted it to, you know, the one that he's allowed to manage it, you know, I don't see where it's saying that they shall be able to reap of the land during the Sabbath. But what I actually see is it's saying, "And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in the land, shall all the increase thereof be meat." You know, so in other words, what I see going on here is for 6 years, you know, whomever's inheritance this land is, they get to reap the benefits of it for those 6 years. But in the 7th year, it's a land Sabbath unto Yahuwah, and they don't get to touch it. They don't get to touch it. But the servants, the maids, the hired servants, and the strangers, and the cattle, and the beasts, they all get to partake of it. You know, now, Yah is stating that all the produce during the time of the land Sabbath was to be had in common amongst the less fortunate. See, this was their opportunity to get a hands up, you know, to get back in the swing of things, get some of the good life, if you would, you know, or recuperate from being down for so long. See, from this we can deduce that the land Sabbath was another safeguard, and is another safeguard, to assure that life in Israel didn't become too oppressive for the citizens of the kingdom. And you'll notice this throughout Torah. Yah did not want life in Israel in the kingdom of Elohim. And let's get that straight, because Israel is the equivalent to the kingdom of Elohim. It was the kingdom of Elohim established upon the earth during that time. You know, hence he went in, brought them out with a strong hand, led them through the desert, brought them into the land, evicted the former inhabitants, and put his people there, and put his name upon them. Amen? Okay, so now here it is. You know, he doesn't want his kingdom to have the same reputation of the kingdoms of the world, which were oppressive to the people, even as Mitzrayim or Egypt was oppressive to Israel. You know, And to assure that that doesn't happen, he's putting these safeguards in place, such as the land Sabbath. He's putting this in place so that life in Israel, life in the kingdom of Elohim, does not become oppressive. Hence, we're going to read a sister verse to what we just read, found in Exodus 23, 9 through 11. It says, also, thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Mizraim. So here we see, he's talking about oppression. And he goes on to say, in 6 years, thou shalt sow the land, and shalt gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year, thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner, thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. So, within this, we can see again, notice here in verse 11, it doesn't mention anything about the quote-unquote owners or ones who have inherited the land, partaking of the land. Right. But it is speaking of the poor people, that they may eat, and that they may leave the beasts of the field, and that they shall eat. So it's still talking about what he's talking about in Leviticus 25 with the poor and with the animals, allowing them to have at it. But it says nothing about the quote-unquote people who originally inherited the land. And we're also told here that the land Sabbath is implemented to assure the land itself gets rest. Now, I want you to ask yourself, why would the land itself need rest? It's just land, just ground. Why does it need rest? And it's even because the land is alive. Yep. The vegetation that grows on it, it's alive. And anything that's alive can get weary. Amen? Amen. Anything that's living can become weary. And hence, it needs rest. Now, I'm going to give you a perfect example as to what happens when the land does not get its proper rest. All you have to do is look at the agriculture here in the U.S., where the land has not been allowed to get its rest. And what you will find is that over the years, there's been a very steady and quite steep decline of nutrients in the produce that comes from the land that's not getting rest. Why? Because over time, the land becomes depleted in its mineral content. And when the vegetation doesn't have the proper mineral content to draw from, then the fruits and vegetables just simply will not be as nutritious. They will not have the mineral content either. If it's not in the soil, then it's not going to be in the fruit and vegetables. And that's what happens when the land becomes weary. And in order for it to be replenished, the land needs some time to rest. See, Yah, being the creator of the heavens and the earth, he knew this. So he put it right there in his rules and regulations, in his teachings and instructions, to assure, because ultimately, what is it going to preserve? Not only the land, but it's going to preserve Israel as a people. Because over the course of time, if they continue to eat foods that are depleted in nutrients, then they're going to become sick and diseased, and they're going to die off. But if they eat good, healthy food, then it will allow for them to be good and healthy as they live off the land. Make sense?
Yes.
Let me have my next reader read Leviticus 25, 8 through 12, please.
And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of the years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the seven Sabbaths of the years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then thou shalt cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, and the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you. And ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall be that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, nor neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thine, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the jubilee, it shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field.
Okay. Now we're going to take a look at a couple things here. In verse 9, then shalt thou cause the trumpet. These 6 words are actually taken from the Hebrew word shofar. Number 7782, which we sound off at the beginning of each service. What he's saying is, you're out of shofar, you're to blow the trumpet, and then it says of the jubilee. This word jubilee here is actually different from the word jubilee in the very next verse. Why would the translators translate them both as jubilee? I don't know. When we see them, we'll ask them. But it's 2 different words, in fact. The first one in verse 9 that we read in verse 9 is teruah, which speaks of a clamoring sound that splits the ears with sound. It's kind of like a 2-toned, something to that effect. And the word jubilee in the next verse, in verse 10, is actually translated from the Hebrew word yobel, which means a blast of the horn from its continuous sound. So it speaks of the long blast, or something to that effect. Now, in verse 9, the word sound is abar, number 5674, meaning to pass over, or by, or through. So, a picture should start forming in your mind that Yah is saying for you to blow the trumpet, blow the shofar, and do the teruah, and let it pass through the land. Let it go over and through the land. When? On the 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement, shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout your land. So, we see a picture of the shofar actually being blown throughout the land, and a specific teruah is being blown. Then in verse 10, it goes on to say, and ye shall hallow, and then we have an aleph tav, Yahshua's 50th year. Hello. And ye shall hallow Yahshua's 50th year, and proclaim liberty. Liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee. This word jubilee here is yobel, the one that speaks of the continuous sound. It shall be a yobel unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee or a yobel, a continuous sound, shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap, Yahushua's, that which groweth of itself. Again, this is the same word we seen in on the previous slide, Safiyat, number 5599, meaning something spontaneously falling off. It's speaking of Yahshua's harvest. And again, it says, nor gather Yahshua's grapes in it. And then of thy vine undresses again, Nazarite, Nazir, Naziyr, Nazir. Meaning the Nazarite or consecrated one. So now, let's think about this for a moment. What is Yah doing by implementing such a structure? What he's in fact doing is he's making certain, again, he's making certain that life in the kingdom of Elohim does not become overly oppressive. And in establishing something such as a Jubilee, you always have, you may have one generation that may go into bondage, but the next generation is going to get out because they're going to run across a Jubilee. You know, or depending on how long you count your generations, 1 to 2 generations may be in bondage, but eventually the family will get out of bondage. See, now that's quite a bit different than what you see today and what you've seen over take place in nations and communities throughout history, where the poor get poor and they never get up. They never get out of poverty. They remain in poverty. They're born into poverty. They die into poverty. Their children are destined to die into poverty, and they never get out of poverty. See, this was not meant to be in the kingdom of Elohim, and it will not be in the future kingdom of Elohim. They all get a chance to get back on their feet, and that's what this Jubilee is about. Yah is so awesome, so yawesome, that he put in place a way for us to get up on our feet even after we've fallen down. Even though our parents or grandparents may have done the wrong thing and found ourselves entwined within poverty for whatever reason, they would always be able to look forward to a Jubilee. And during that Jubilee, they will be set free. All their debts would be forgiven. You know, this is, the U.S. have something similar. You know, they call it bankruptcy. You know, bless their heart, they tried. You know, but it's just not quite the same. You know, it's just not quite the same. You know, here it is, the Jubilee forgives all debts, and you get to get your land back. You know, and that's very, 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 very important. Why is it important to get your land back? Because if you do not own your land, then you will never be free. I'm going to repeat that. See, because a lot of people don't understand this concept nowadays. But if you cannot own your land, and by the way, no one in the U.S. practically owns their land. Hello? But if you cannot own your land, then you cannot truly be free. Why? Because you can, if you chose to, live off your land. You could grow food on your land. You can, even if need be, you could go off grid and produce your own source of power, and you know, in modern day, you know, conveniences, you can contrive on your own without the use of or aid of anyone else. There are ways that can be done. You know, and you could truly live off your land and not be subject to anyone but Yah. But within this country, we're not allowed to own our land. As a matter of fact, in most countries around the world, you are not allowed to own your land. All the land is owned by the government. You say, but Pastor, I have a deed. It says I own my land. Yeah, you know, you do have a deed, but you don't have the deed. You know, the deed is called a allodial title. If you have the allodial title to your land, then you will not have to pay property taxes. But anyone who's paying property taxes do not own their land, because the landlord is not the one that pays. The tenant is the one that pays. And as long as you're paying anyone, then you're not the landlord. The landlord receives monies for the use of the land. They don't pay monies for the use of the land. You know, so I want you to understand that, because you know it's a very thick deception that they that they poured out, that they blanketed it over the world in all actuality. Not just this country, but the world. You know, they had similar systems all around the world. You know, where don't no one own the land but the government. And as a result, you could never be free. You know, if you owned your land, you could live off your land and you won't have to, you know, deal with nobody but Yah, you know, if you so chose. But not being able to own the land, you're always going to have to pay rent. And if you think you really own your land, stop paying rent. and watch and see if the landlord don't come and evict you. How can he do this? He's just a bully. No, it's because it's his land. He's the landlord. And you're just renting. You know, and that's what your guaranteed deed, you know, or a guaranteed title, that's what it promises you. Use of the land. That's all. You just using it. That don't mean it's yours. Don't get it twisted. That's why they're able to come and do what they call eminent domain. You know, just take it from you if they so choose. You know, because, hey, we need to use it. Yeah, but it's mine. No. And you didn't read the fine print, did you? You know, but that's what's happening. So, this was a safeguard against that sort of thing. The Jubilee of Elohim was and is a safeguard against that sort of thing. You know, none of his people will be destined to live out eternity in bondage. They will always get an opportunity to get back on their feet, to start over, to get a fresh start. You know, how awesome is that? That's an awesome hell we serve. My next reader, verses 13 through 19.
In the year of this Jubilee, ye shall return every man unto his possession. And if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buyest aught of thy neighbor's hand, ye shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, thou shalt buy of thy neighbor. And according unto the number of years of the fruits, he shall sell unto thee. According to the multitude of years, thou shalt increase the price thereof, and according to the fewness of years, thou shalt diminish the price of it. For according to the number of years of it, the fruits thou doth he sell unto thee. Ye shall not therefore oppress one another, but thou shalt fear thy Elohim. For I am Yahuwah your Elohim. Wherefore ye shall do my statutes, and keep my judgments, and do them, and ye shall dwell in the land in safety. And the land shall yield her fruit, and ye shall eat your fill, and dwell therein in safety.
Okay. Now, we have quite a few avatars throughout this passage. First in verse 13, we have one in betwixt of and this within the first sentence, in the year of this Jubilee. There's actually an Aleph Tav, and it's an interesting one because it has the Hay and the Zayin in front of it. The Hay representing Yah's grace, the Zayin represents his works or the works of Yahushua. So it's speaking of in the year of the grace and works of Yahushua's Jubilee. And whenever you see Jubilee from this point on, it's going to be Yobel. You know, it's the Yobel, meaning that long blast. It says, so in the year, when you hear that long blast, and we know that it says right before the Messiah come back, it'll be at right after the long blast, when the trump sound long. Amen. You know, so you see the symbolism there? You see what it's really talking about? Okay, so in this year, ye shall return every man unto his possession. And what follows is what naturally you would have when you have an economy that's set up with a Jubilee. You know, now when we start giving worth to something, you know, say someone did get in a situation, a circumstance where they had to sell their land, you know, they're really not selling it, they're only leasing it for a term, because they know they have to get it back at the time of the Jubilee. Amen? You know, so, seeing that we had this Jubilee implemented, then it would affect the way one would buy and sell. And this is what we see in this passage, dealing with that situation of buying and selling with a nation that has a Jubilee. And he says in verse 14, and if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buyest aught of thy neighbor's land, ye shall not oppress. See, he's very adamant about life in the kingdom of Elohim not being oppressive. You shall not oppress Yahshua's one another. You know, because why? Because we're brethren. Yeah. We're family. According to the number of years after the Jubilee that thou shalt buy. And then we have an aleph tav, you know, translated from of thy. You know, and we have an aleph tav where we have a mem in front of it. So speaking of that which flows into Yahushua. You know, so according to the number of years after the Jubilee, thou shalt buy, that's which flows into Yahushua of thy neighbor, and according unto the years of the fruits, he shall sell unto thee. So you can figure out the worth of the land by factoring in how many years there is to the Jubilee and how many harvests you're going to get from the land. You know, so you know how many harvests you get, so you know how much you know, you can sell the harvest for, and you can come up with a figure. Verse 16, according to the multitude of years shalt increase the price thereof, according to the fewness of the years thou shalt diminish the price thereof, for according to the number of the years of the fruits doeth he sell it unto thee. You know, so it's all factored in based around the Jubilee. And then in verse 17 we have an aleph tav. It says, ye shall not therefore oppress, again, aleph tav, another. You know, don't oppress Yahushua's another, you know, your brother. Thou shalt fear thy Elohim, for I am Yahuwah thy Elohim. And in verse 18 we have a couple more. And it speaks of, wherefore ye shall do my statutes. And we have the aleph tav with a bob in front of it. And speaking of man's and his works and that oppose Yahushua, and you know, you're to actually do his statutes and keep his judgments. Don't oppose them. And do them, this word them is translated from the aleph and the tav with the mem following it, speaking of that which flows out of Yahshua, and ye shall dwell in the land of safety. You know, so I'm here to tell you that the same rules of Israel applies to the kingdom of Elohim nowadays. You know, and the kingdom of Elohim that we're gonna inherit. Leviticus 25:20 through 22 says, and if ye shall say, what shall we eat the 7th year? Behold, we shall not sow nor gather in Yahushua's our increase. There's aleph tav there, so I'll say in Yahushua's our increase. You know, and then it goes on to say, then I will command, and there's an aleph tav, Yahushua's blessing upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth for 3 years. And ye shall sow, aleph tav, Yahushua's 8th year, and eat yet of the old fruit until the 9th year, until her fruits come in, ye shall eat of the old store. Now, I want you to ask yourself, if they were allowed to eat of the produce of the 7th year, then why would they be asking, what shall we eat in the 7th year? You know, so that goes to show that, you know, they actually were not allowed to eat of the 7th year, but the poor amongst them were. You know, and if you think about that, you know, that gives them the opportunity. They can actually reap up the harvest, and they could actually, you know, maybe even sell some to their master, or sell some to someone else. Give them a chance to help them get on their feet. Give them a chance to help come up out of poverty. Because if you owe a debt, you know, and you're always trying to work off that debt, then how are you going to accumulate anything for yourself? Anything to get out of the hole that you've done gotten yourself in. You understand? You know, so it'd be very difficult to do that. But if you have a land Sabbath, every 7th year, you have an opportunity to accumulate some stuff in order to get out of the situation that you found yourself in. That's y'all's grace. That's his grace and his mercy. You know, now, but that would be kind of unfair to those who inherited the land and they actually are the ones entrusted to the land. That would be kind of unfair to them, because now, here it is, from the 6th year, we see at the Jubilee they were not to sow or reap. And then that 7th Sabbath, that 7th land Sabbath, which is the 49th year, they were not to sow or reap. So you had 2 years back to back in which they weren't to sow or reap. You know, and so they're asking, well, what should we eat? You know, if the poor amongst us and the disprivileged and the beasts of the field, if they get to get everything, what about us? But Yah he did not forsake them. You know, he had their goodwill in mind too. He said in verse 21, then I will command Yahushua's blessings upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth fruit for 3 years.
Yeah.
See, so the other ones, the unfortunate gets blessed, but the fortunate, they don't get left out either. They still get, you know, they don't skip a beat. They don't lose anything. Yah blesses them with enough for 3 years in the 6th year. Now, this is no different than what he did with the weekly Sabbath. It's clear to see that the land Sabbaths are parallel to the weekly Sabbaths, only on a larger scale. Instead of working 6 days and resting the 7th day, Israel's land is allowed to work 6 years and rest on the 7th year. Whereas Yah will provide extra manna on the 6th day, he provides extra crops in the 6th year. Can you see that?
Yes.
It's a perfect parallel. Now, with this in mind, let us also consider the weekly Sabbath cycle, which, if reckoned by the moon, has an end whereby the 6 days of work and resting, the 7th day cycle, is interrupted by the new moon, and thereby reset the cycle. So when we look at it in that account, we get to the last Sabbath of the cycle of the moon, and then we go into the new moon. So you got the last Sabbath, which is a day of no work, and then you have the new moon, which is also a day to be observed. You know, back to back. Now, let us consider also the parallel of Yah's weekly Sabbath being spoken of here, i.e., was land Sabbath, i.e. is land Sabbath, whereas we're told to count 6 years and allow the land to rest on the 7th year. Again, at the end of the cycle, the 7th land Sabbath, we have an interruption to the pattern, i.e. a Jubilee. With the weekly Sabbath, it's interrupted by a new moon. With the land Sabbath, it's interrupted by a Jubilee. You know, so it's no longer work 6 and rest the 7th. Now it's the last one is work 6, rest the 7th, and rest the 8th. And here, with the land Sabbath, again, after the 6th land Sabbath, i.e. the 49th year, you rest the 49th year, you rest the 50th year, and then you go back. Which also acts to reset the pattern. After the Jubilee, then you start over. And if we were to count the years that were not to work at the end of this cycle of the land Sabbath, we'll find it identical to the weekly Sabbaths. You know, the same thing. You go through for 6 days. At the end of the month, you work that last Sabbath. You work through for the 6 days. Then you rest the 7th, and then the new moon starts. It resets everything, and then after that, you go back to work. Same thing here. We see that after the 6th year, you rest the 7th year, and then the next year, which will be the 8th year, the Jubilee, you also rest. Well, and you also rest, and then you go back the following year. And then we see on the 9th year, you're able to actually eat of the fruits again. You know, so it's really a direct parallel if you take a look at it and consider. Now, Leviticus 25:23 through 27 says, "And the land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine." For, and we have an olive tithe, for Yahushua's, for that which flows from Yahushua's, strangers and sojourners, ye are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land of your possessions ye shall grant a redemption for the land. Now, it says, if thy, well, let me stop here for a minute, because like here in America, we also have a redemptive clause that is actually patterned after this as well. You know, if you lose your home, you used to have 2 years in which to redeem it. You know, now in some places it's only 6 months. You know, in some places it's a year. You know, I don't know too many places that's beyond a year anymore. You know, but this is the premise for that. This is where they got that notion from. And verse 25 says, "If thy brother be waxen poor, and have sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then shall he redeem that which his brother sold." And we have another olive tithe in there after redeem, translated from the word as the word that. So he shall redeem Yahushua's, which his brother sold. And if the man have none to redeem it, and himself be able to redeem it, then let him count the years of the sale thereof, and restore the overplus unto the man to whom he sold it, that he may return unto his possession. And we have a couple olive tithes in there after count, translated as the, and let them count the, actually let them count olive tithe years, or Yahushua's years of the sale thereof, and restore olive tithe overplus unto the man to whom he sold it, that he may return into his possessions. In other words, one would simply subtract the numbers of years of the land that had been used by the current landlord, and whatever's left is the redemption price. You know, so, you know, he paid, say, $10,000 for it, and there was 10 years to the Jubilee. That was $1,000 a year, and he only spent 5 years in the land. Then, in order to redeem it, he would just simply pay the remaining $5,000. Simple. Awesome system. You know, and again, that way the folks don't become oppressed. You know, they always have an opportunity to get back on their feet, to get back in the swing of things, to have an opportunity to overcome. You know, let me have my next reader read verses 28 through 34.
But if he be not able to restore it to him, then that which is sold shall remain in the hand of him that have brought it until the year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall go out, and he shall return unto his possession. And if a man sell a dwelling house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it is sold. Within a full year may he redeem it. And if he be not redeemed, if it be not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city shall be established forever to him that brought it throughout his generations. It shall not go out in the Jubilee. But the house of the villages which have no wall round about them shall be counted as the fields of the country. They may be redeemed, and they shall go out in the Jubilee. Notwithstanding the cities of the Levites and the houses of the cities of their possession, may the Levites redeem at any time. And if a man purchase the Levites, then the house that was sold and the city of his possession shall go out in the year of Jubilee. For the houses of the cities of the Levites are their possession among the children of Israel. But the field of the suburbs of their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession.
Okay. So, we're getting into some specifics here. So speaking of, if one is not able to restore it unto him, maybe sold to someone else, don't know where it's at, you know, who owns it, whatever, I don't know. Then that which is sold shall remain in the hand of Yahushua that brought it until the end of the Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall go out, and he shall return unto his possession. So everyone who brought this land had the understanding that it will return to its original owner during the time of the Jubilee. So during the time of the Jubilee, whoever owned it is coming home. You know, you can just imagine in your mind, here go the shofars blasting along, and everybody, you know, you see all these poor folks, they just heading home. They going back to their land. Good times have come again. You know, they're able to live off their land once more. They don't have to worry about working for someone else. Now they need some help. They got to find somebody to work for them, to help work the land. You know, so they get a fresh new start. Isn't that a awesome plan? You know, that is just wonderful. And it takes an L like ours to come up with a system like that. You know, that is just awesome. You know, that way no one gets ran down forever. You know, now here in this passage we're dealing with the dwellings of houses within cities. You know, within a walled city. You know, and here we have Malachi in verse 28, where it's speaking of, then that which is sold shall remain in the hand of him. This word him is actually Aleph Tav, that in the hand of Aleph Tav that have brought it until the end of the year. And then it's speaking of, if a man sell a dwelling house in a walled city, he has a full year to redeem it. But if he doesn't redeem it within that year, then, you know, he loses it. You know, there's an Aleph Tav in verse 30 after the word bought, where it's saying, and if ye be not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city shall be established forever to him that bought. And then we have Aleph Tav with the vow that bought Yahshua's, or that which flowed from Yahshua. You know, it throughout his generations, that shall not go out in the Jubilee. But, the very next verse, 31, but the houses of the villages that have no wall round about them shall be counted as the fields of the country. They may be redeemed, and they shall go out in the Jubilee. Wow, what's the difference? You know, the ones with the wall, you know, versus the ones without the wall. Well, the ones that was with the wall, you know, they were not in anyone's particular land. The villages, on the other hand, were made up of the inheritances that was adjacent to one another. You know, but sometimes people moved out of the villages and, you know, they felt a little safer in a walled city. You know, and so if they had a place in a walled city and they lost it, they had a year to redeem it, and if not, they couldn't get it back. You know, because that was something that they maybe purchased, but it wasn't their inheritance. You know, the houses of the villages with no wall around, you know, they counted as the fields of the country, and they may be redeemed. You know, because it's your inheritance. You can never lose that. But notwithstanding the cities of the Levites and the houses of their cities, of their possessions, the Levites, they may redeem theirs at any time. Why? Because they didn't get an inheritance. You know, Yah was their inheritance. And if you take the house that they're living in, they have nothing. Literally. They have nothing. You know, so Yah didn't want that to happen to his servants, so he allows them to redeem it at any time. And if a man, verse 33 says, and if a man purchase of the Levites, then the house that was sold and the city of his possession shall go out in the year of Jubilee. For the houses of the cities of the Levites are their possessions among the children of Israel. But the field of the suburbs of the cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. And perpetual possession is actually translated from an Aleph Tav with a het and a zayin in the midst, speaking of the protection and the protective works of Yahushua. You know, in other words, he's protecting their cities and their suburbs. So hands off. Can't buy those. Not for sale. Even if they want to sell them, Yah says no. Can't have them. In verse 35 we read, and if thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him, yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. Now, these three words, fallen in decay, is taken from the Hebrew word molt, number 4131, meaning to totter, to waver, to shake, to slip, in conjunction with the word yod, which is the word for hand in the Hebrew. So we put that together, we see a shaking hand or a wavering hand. Now, here it is, it says, if thy brother be waxen poor and his hands are wavering. What do you do with your hands? Work. You know, so your works, his works are wavering. Maybe, you know, there's no work for his profession, or maybe he's done waxed old and feeble and can't work anymore, or whatever the case may be. The works of his hands have become shaky. He's not being able to, they're not carrying him anymore. They're not able to sustain him anymore. You know, and Yah is saying, you know, then thou shalt relieve him. Yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. And then he goes on, and he says, and thou shalt take thou no usury of him or increase. In other words, don't charge him any interest. You know, just because he owes you, you know, don't start compounding it like they do nowadays. You know, you get back on your property rent, you know, property taxes. They will start adding interest, compounding. You know, they will increase. They didn't take that from this. So, you know, beware of that. And here it is, after that, we have Aleph Tav with the Mem and the Vav at the end. So speaking of that, which flows into Yahushua. Yahushua's man that's working and following him. You're not to take any usury from him. You're not to add any increase to him. But fear thy Elohim, that thy brother may live with thee. And then he also goes on in verse 37, thou shalt not give him the money upon usury. If you lend him something, don't give it to him, you know, at 25% interest, say. Or lend him thy victuals for increase. You know, so don't lend him your money or lend him food, you know, at, you know, with interest rates, you know. Well, yeah, I'm going to give you $100, you got to give me $125 back. I'm going to give you 1 bushel of apples, but I'm going to need 1.5 bushels back. You know, not to do that sort of thing. Yeah, verse 38 says, I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, brought you, and this word you is actually an Aleph Tav with the Kaf and the Mem, speaking of Yahushua's filtering that follows him forth out of the land of Egypt, out of Aleph Tav, land of Egypt, Yahushua's land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your Elohim. Verse 39, and if thy brother that dwelleth by thee be waxen poor and be sold unto thee, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondservant, but as a hired servant, and as a sojourner he shall be with thee. And he shall serve thee until the year of Jubilee. Then shall he depart from thee, both he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family. And unto you, and again, these words, the possession is again, the Aleph and Tav, with the Het and the Zayin in the mix, speaking of the protective works of Yahushua. Of his fathers shall he return. You know, so that which Yahshua is protecting, i.e. their inheritance, he should be able to return to. Now, the difference betwixt the bondservant and the others, i.e. the hired servant or the sojourner, is that the bondservant didn't get paid. That is, they were slaves. The bondservants were straight up slaves. You know, they were usually acquired from the spoils of war. When they went into war and, you know, the children rather than killing them, you know, sometimes they would take them into bondage, and they would make them slaves, you know, and they would become the bondmen and the bondwomen, you know. So this is, and what Yah is saying is, you're not to treat them in the same manner, not to treat his people, your brother, in the same manner as the bondservant, you know, but as a hired servant or a sojourner, someone that's passing through, you know, they need to get on their feet or make some money while they be on their way, you know. You hire them, you give them the wage y'all agreed upon, and they keep it moving. Or, you know, just someone that just works for you as an employee, you know, and you pay them on a regular basis. That's the way you're to treat your brother. You're not to treat him as a slave. Let me have my next reader read verses 42 through 48.
For they are my servants, which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondmen. Thou shalt not rule over him with rigor, but shalt fear thy Elohim. Both thy bondmen and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen that are round about you. Of them shall ye buy bondmen and bondmaids. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. And you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner by thee, or to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him.
Okay. So, you know, Yah's giving the reasons why he's saying what he's saying. He's saying because they, you know, Israel are his servants, which he brought. You know, they're not to be sold as bondmen. See, once we come into the kingdom of Elohim, we belong to Yah. He looks out for us. Even when we're down, he looks out for us. He set his jubilee in place so that we might be down today, but we won't stay down. Amen. He's gonna rise us up at some point. At some point, he's gonna set us free. Whether the humanity that surrounds us choose to set us free or not, don't matter. He says he will set us free. He will give a jubilee. You know, even as when the Messiah came, you know, we were set free. Amen. You know, we were given a type of jubilee. We was able to go back to our inheritance, i.e. the serving the Most High El, rather than we had a choice of serving him rather than serving man. It says, thou shalt not rule over him with rigor, but thou shalt fear Elohim, knowing that he's his servant. You know, don't treat my servant any old kind of way. That's what he's telling them. You know, both thy bondmen and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, you know, which flows into Yahshua of the heathen, that are round about you, of them ye shall buy bondmen and bondmaids. That's where you get them. You know, now, take a look at the contrast betwixt the Aleph Tav in verse 42 and the Aleph Tav with the Mem in verse 42 and the Aleph Tav with the Mem in verse 44. We see the Aleph Tav with the Mem in verse 42, the Mem is following the Aleph Tav, speaking of that which follows Yahushua. He says, for they are servants which I brought of Yahushua, which flows from Yahushua, forth out of the land of Mitzrayim. But here, in verse 44, he's speaking of both thy bondmen and our bondmaids, which thou shalt have. And then we had an Aleph Tav with the Mem, which flows into Yahushua, of the heathen that are round about you. Of them shall ye buy bondmen and bondmaids. You know, so in other words, that which is produced from him, you not to touch, which comes and flows from him, but that which flows to him from elsewhere, then you can make them bondmen and bondmaids. Those are the ones that you conquer and you know, you force to do your bidding, pretty much make them slaves. Now, And we also have an olive tithe with them in verse 46 that's following. And ye shall take that which flows from Yahushua, as translated from the word them, as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, ye shall not rule one over another with rigor. Can't do that to his servants. You know, and if a sojourner or a stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner, or to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. So sometimes the strangers came into the kingdom of Elohim and they did well. They waxed rich. You know, and they would buy some of the brethren. You know, but Yah always allows for them to be redeemed. You know, he always allows for them to be redeemed. You know, again, looking out for his own. Verses 49 through 55, either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him of his family may redeem him, or if he be able, he may redeem himself. And he shall reckon with him that bought him from the year that he was sold to him unto the year of Jubilee, and the price of his sale shall be according to the number of years, according to the time of an hired servant, shall it be with him. So, if you took in a servant of Yah's, if you took one of your brothers in, you know, and he was to be as a hired servant. In other words, you know, you were to reckon his during that time it was different, and it wasn't like the skilled trades of now today where, you know, they value one type of labor above another type of labor. They had a day's wage, and if you worked for a day's wage. You know, whatever that wage was, that's what you got. You know, whatever, if you had an easy job, then it was, you know, you made an easy day's wage. If you had a hard job, then you had a hard day's wage. You know, now eventually that began to fluctuate for obvious reasons, but at some point they just had, you know, a day's wage. And everybody was working pretty hard back then. Now, and if you were brought, you would add that day's wage up until the time of the Jubilee. So if you were going to sell yourself, or if you were going to buy someone's labor for a length of time, you know, this is how you came up with a price. Verse 51, if there be yet many years behind according unto them, he shall give again the price of his redemption out of the money that he was brought for. And if there remain but few years unto the year of Jubilee, and he shall count with him, and according unto the years shall he give him again. And then we have an olive tithe, Yahushua's price of his redemption. And as a yearly hired servant shall he be with him, and the other shall not rule with rigor over him in thy sight. And if he be not redeemed in these years, then he shall go out in the year of Jubilee, both he and his children with him. For unto me, verse 55, for unto me the children of Israel are servants. Don't forget it. You know, even though you're allowed to have land, you're allowed to have bond servants and maid servants, even within the kingdom of Elohim, you are not your own. Amen. We all belong to the Most High El. We are his servants of Yahushua. Yes. And he tells us here, for unto me the children of Israel are servants. They are my servants, whom I brought. You know, and we have an olive tithe in between brought and forth, which speaks of man and his works in Yahushua, and that which flows from them, came out of the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. I am your judge. I'm looking over you. I'm looking out for you. And you owe your allegiance to me, Yah says. You know, respect my teachings and instructions and what I say, and everything will be okay. Well, that is the final verse. That's all I have for you today. Pray it was a blessing unto you at this time.